Good afternoon, Venice School participants, panelists, colleagues, distinguished guests. I'm happy to welcome all of you to the Aula Magna of the Monastero di San Nicolo for our roundtable discussion, How to Defend Democratic Change in Venezuela. I'll give first a little bit of context. Today is the opening day of the Venice School of Human Rights. This is a summer school that's been going on for some 8-9 years here in the monastery, and usually taking place in June. This year we've anticipated the summer school to the spring, so it's a spring school in the month of April to fit with everybody's agendas, and in particular to link up with our partners in the European Parliament who are supporting us in many ways, in particular through the Sakharov Prize and the Sakharov Fellowship Program. And we're very happy to have some 15 Sakharov Fellows here with us in the school and in the Aula Magna today. We also have a cooperation with a consortium of Russian universities providing human rights education, and we have students from the Russian master's program, our cousins in the Russian Federation with us today, as well as a number of participants coming through other avenues. We've spent the whole day discussing the issue of human rights defenders, and in particular heard a very inspirational presentation by Mr. Laurent Saleh speaking about his experience as a human rights defender in Venezuela. And we'll actually pick up from your presentation and now extend it to the wider group here today. So we feel there's such rich topics and such distinguished speakers here in the room, or experts in the room, that we're very happy we could also turn this into a public event, which is open to all of you, and at the same time being live streamed through Facebook, as I understand it. I would like to start by also taking the opportunity to thank our friends and sponsors of this particular event, Avocado Federico Cappelletti, who's responsible for the European Observatory of the Italian Union of Criminal Law, and Avvocato Giorgio Bortolotto, who's the honorary president of the Criminal Law Association of Venice. We really appreciate your support and sponsorship of this event. Now to the content of it. No, I would also like to take the occasion to introduce the panelists who are sitting with me here today. Our distinguished guest and keynote speaker this afternoon, Laurent Saleh, was a leader of a student organization mobilization in Venezuela, and was imprisoned for more than 4 years before released last year and granted asylum in Spain. Laurent Saleh is the 2017 Sakharov Prize laureate, and we're very proud to have you with us today. Next to me is sitting Ambassador Mara Marinaki, who has many different functions in diplomacy and also working with the European Union and other international organizations, and is currently the European External Action Service Principal Advisor on Gender and on the implementation of the Security Council Resolution on Women, Peace and Security. We're also very happy to have you with us. At the opposite end of the table is Mr. Michel Forst, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders. Michel Forst also has a huge CV with many different functions and distinguished roles, but it's in particular your expertise on the situation of human rights defenders that brings you here today, and we're grateful to have you on the panel. And next to Michel Forst is Manfred Novak, who is Secretary General of the Global Campus of Human Rights, which is based here in the monastery, but also a distinguished expert in human rights worldwide, with many important functions, including his tenure from 2004 to 2010 as UN Special Rapporteur on Torture. We're going to start with a presentation again by Laurent Saleh, that will be simultaneously translated or consecutively translated. We're very happy that Mr. Stefan Kraus, who is working with the European Parliament's Directorate for External Policies and Democratic Support, and is supporting us in our Venice School and in all our activities. Stefan Kraus is also going to act as a translator here in the panel. So we will start with a presentation following your very personal presentation of your experience in Venezuela as an imprisoned human rights defender. I understand now you will tell us a little bit more about the political situation in Venezuela, and maybe also focus on how we in the international community can support and assist the important transition that is ongoing. Following that, our panelists will have a comment, a reflection, a short intervention, and we'll quite quickly open up for comments and discussion with the participants in the room. So, welcome to all of you, and Lauren, the word is yours.
Bueno, un lujo poder estar aquí sentado con ustedes.
It's a luxury for me to be seated here, to sit here today with you.
Se siente uno chiquito aquí.
I feel so small.
En Venezuela hay un estado de terror.
In Venezuela there is a state of terror.
Hay una población civil sometida a un nivel de violencia muy, muy elevado por parte del Estado.
There is a civil population suffering a high level of pressure from the state.
Estamos hablando de un terrorismo de Estado.
It's nothing else than state terrorism.
En Venezuela, y debemos partir de algunas cosas primero.
So we should start from some basics to understand Venezuela.
En Venezuela no hay una democracia en problemas.
There is, we're not facing a democracy which has some problems.
En Venezuela no hay un conflicto político.
It's not even about a political conflict.
En Venezuela no hay un enfrentamiento de dos bandos.
It's not about a confrontation between values.
En Venezuela hay una organización criminal que ha tomado el poder político y se ha atrincherado ahí en el poder.
In Venezuela, there's an organization that has taken political power and that sticks to it.
Y desde ahí somete continuamente a la población a un estado de terror.
And they dominate the population with a state of terror.
Haciendo uso del secuestro, la extorsión, el asesinato, la prisión política, el hambre y la enfermedad.
And they kidnap, they kill, they assassinate, they put pressure, they harass, they use hunger and disease.
En el año 1998, Hugo Rafael Chávez Fría, un ex militar que había intentado dar un golpe de Estado en el pasado, llegó al poder a través de unas elecciones democráticas.
In 1998, Hugo Chávez, a former military who once attempted a coup, came to power through democratic elections.
Este militar y su grupo habían asesinado a muchas personas en el año 92 cuando intentaron tomar el poder a través de un golpe de Estado.
When this soldier Chavez and his people tried to seize power back in 1992, they killed a lot of people.
Pero bueno, un gobierno decidió ponerlo en libertad para molestar al otro sector político opositor.
And now they stay into power by harassing the political opponents.
Y esta persona usa los mecanismos democráticos para llegar al poder.
And they actually use democratic mechanisms to come to power.
Y es que los dictadores y los tiranos no llegan al poder vestidos de dictadores ni de tiranos, porque si no, no llegarían al poder. Es decir, llegan vestidos de demócratas.
And when it comes to tyrants and dictators, they don't like to come to power dressed as tyrants or dictators. They try to hide that. They prefer democratic means.
Y una vez en el poder se atrincheran y no dejan el poder fácilmente.
And once they are in power, they stay there, they stick there, and they don't let it go anymore.
Y aquel individuo que desde el poder está dispuesto a torcer la norma y la ley para mantenerse en el poder, está dispuesto a todo.
And the one who is in power, once he's there, is ready to abuse law and justice and all the system to make everything possible to stay in power.
Como matar a todo un pueblo de hambre y enfermedad, como está pasando actualmente en Venezuela.
How can you send a whole population to hunger and disease like it's what we're witnessing in Venezuela?
Hugo Chávez usó el odio, el resentimiento para hacer política. Y cuando los políticos usan el odio como instrumento político, está sembrando un conflicto. Es una bomba de tiempo que va a explotar en cualquier momento.
Hugo Chavez is a person who used hatred as a mean of making politics. And when you resort to hatred as an instrument in politics, you have a ticking time bomb.
Pasaron el tiempo y el petróleo empezó a subir de precio.
With the time, oil prices started to rise.
Y gracias a la cantidad de dinero que empezó a tener Hugo Chávez, cuando llega al poder estaba el barril a 10, 8 dólares y llegó a más de $100. Un país que producía 4 millones de barriles diarios. O sea, multipliquen 4 millones diarios por $100.
So when Chavez came to power, the oil price was at like $8 or $10 a barrel. Now it ended up at over 100. So imagine a country that produces about 400 million a day. What price this is at the end?
Imagínense todo ese dinero, sin contar el oro, el aluminio, el diamante, el gas, todo ese dinero en manos de unos militares que habían intentado llegar al poder por un golpe de Estado.
And can you imagine all this money? And it's not only about oil. I'm also speaking of other resources like gold, diamonds, gas. All this money from these resources in the hand of one military man who tried a military coup before and then came into power.
Desde el poder empiezan a debilitar todas las instituciones del Estado. Y cuando digo todas, es desde la justicia hasta el hogar, la iglesia, los sindicatos.
And then he started to take over all institutions of the state. And if I talk about all institutions, I speak really about all of them, the justice system, even the church.
Estaba eliminando el contrapeso necesario ese contrapeso tan necesario en una democracia.
And he was just eliminating all these checks and balances that are crucial to a democratic system.
En el 2007, Hugo Chávez decide cerrar el principal medio de comunicación, Radio Caracas Televisión, y a partir de ahí implementar algo que desde Cuba le habían dicho que era necesario, y era una hegemonía comunicacional, el control de las comunicaciones en Venezuela.
Back in 2007, when Chavez decided to close Caracas television, he basically applied something that he was told by the Cubans he should do, meaning getting hegemony over the means of communication.
Y claro, en un mundo donde el petróleo sube a un precio tan elevado, pues Chávez resultó tener muchos amigos en todo el mundo y empezó a repartir dinero y a comprar voluntades.
And at the end, imagine with these increasing oil prices, suddenly Chavez came to have a lot of friends in the world.
Y por más que intentábamos decirle al mundo lo que estaba pasando y hacia dónde íbamos, a nadie le interesaba escucharnos en ese momento.
And in these circumstances, we could do whatever we wanted. We could call the world to understand our situation, but nobody would hear us.
Las dictaduras y las tiranías, para poder crecer, necesitan indudablemente cooperación internacional.
What dictatorships tend to forget that necessarily you need international cooperation.
O digamos neutralidad y no intervención.
Or at least neutrality and no intervention.
Luego muere Hugo Chávez y deja a Nicolás Maduro en el poder. Y ya empieza a bajar el precio del petróleo.
And then when Maduro succeeded to Chavez as a president, the oil prices began to fall.
Ya no está Chávez el carismático, el simpático, ya no está el petróleo y ese dinero exacerbado, y naturalmente, como en cualquier nación sometida en dictadura, el Estado empieza a colapsar.
So in these circumstances, the nice chap, Chavez, was not here anymore. The nice and charismatic one, replaced by Maduro, and also with the lowering oil prices, the situation started to be quite different.
En Venezuela decimos, amor con hambre no dura.
In Venezuela, we have a saying which is, love while you're hungry is nothing to last.
Fue ahí, y esto es vergonzoso, pero es la verdad, solo cuando el precio del petróleo bajó y PDVSA empezó a fallar, fue que empezaron a tomar en cuenta afuera las denuncias que tanto habíamos hecho.
And basically only when the first failures appeared with the decreasing oil price, then suddenly there was some attention.
Y paralelo a la decadencia y la impopularidad creciente del régimen, crecía la violencia. Menos dinero, menos popularidad, más violencia y más agresión.
And simultaneously with the downgoing legitimacy and of the government, the violence increased.
Y claro, entre otras cosas, empieza la duda y las sospechas entre ellos mismos y sus sectores militares.
And at the same time, they started being suspicious amongst themselves in the different military sectors.
Por eso la necesidad de convertir en Venezuela en la capital del terrorismo occidental.
And this was why it became necessary for them to make Venezuela a capital for terrorism.
Y generar unos anillos con grupos terroristas islámicos, grupos paramilitares, guerrilla colombiana.
And there is some collusion with Islamist terroristic groups, with the Colombian paramilitaries and other forces.
Empiezan a perseguir y a neutralizar a cualquier líder opositor que amenazara su permanencia en el poder, y empiezan a meter preso a todos, especialmente a los líderes más jóvenes.
And this is when they started neutralizing all possible political opponents, and when they started putting everybody in prison.
Tomar por completo el control de los alimentos y los medicamentos.
And they took full control on medicine and on food.
Instrumentalizar el hambre. ¿Quieres comer? Ponte la camisa roja. ¿Quieres medicina? Ponte la camisa roja.
They instrumentalize hunger and need for healthcare. So if you want to eat, put the red shirt. If you want to have medicine, put the red shirt.
Y si protestas, ¡boom!
And if you protest, we're going to kill you.
Es un estado de terror permanente.
It's a permanent state of terror.
No me puedo extender, entonces no vamos a hablar de lo que pasó en los últimos años, y vamos a regresar hasta lo que está pasando ahorita, este año.
We will not be able to understand what happens nowadays, these times, if we don't go back a little bit in time.
Más o menos 5 millones de venezolanos han huido del país por hambre, por enfermedad, tratando de salvar sus vidas.
The crisis drove 5 million Venezuelans out of the country, who left out of hunger because they starved and they had no medicine.
Más de 800 presos políticos.
There are over 800 political prisoners.
El año pasado, Nicolás Maduro debió hacer elecciones presidenciales.
Last year, Nicolás Maduro should have organized presidential elections.
Pero no quiso, porque unas elecciones presidenciales libres significa dejar el poder.
But he didn't want to, because organizing presidential elections, free presidential elections, would have meant leaving power.
Y ya sabían, porque en el 2015 fueron las elecciones a la Asamblea Nacional y a pesar de la trampa y el fraude, las perdieron. Entonces sabían que unas nuevas elecciones iba a ser la peor derrota en su vida.
They had the lessons learned from 2015, when there were elections for the National Assembly, when in spite of all the fraud that happened, they lost. They realized that this would be repeated if it came to free presidential elections.
Perdieron la Asamblea Nacional, entonces crearon una asamblea paralela.
So as they lost the National Assembly, they decided to set up a parallel institution, the Constituent Assembly.
Ilegal, completamente inconstitucional, pero crearon esa estructura paralela para pasar por encima de la voluntad popular que había elegido una Asamblea Nacional.
An assembly which is illegal in the eyes of the Constitution, but which precisely serves the fact to turn around, to turn over the legitimate National Assembly.
Y el año pasado, cuando eran las elecciones, ilegalizó todos los partidos y hizo un parapeto, un montaje, y compitió básicamente él con él.
So last year they made up like a puppet show, and basically it was a game, Maduro against himself.
Entonces, no quiso hacer elecciones el año pasado. Este año, en enero, se acababa el periodo presidencial.
So last year he didn't want to organize elections. This year in January, the presidential term came to its end.
Y comenzaba un nuevo periodo, pero como no había elecciones, ¿qué pasa en ese caso? Sí,
So the question is, well, what happens if the presidential terms ends without having organized elections?
entonces, al momento de la juramentación, él decide imponerse, no se presenta a la Asamblea Nacional y se juramenta a la fuerza.
So when it came to taking his oath as a president, he didn't show up before the National Assembly.
Entonces, ¿qué dice la Constitución?
So let's look what does the Constitution say in this case.
En estos casos, cuando hay una usurpación del poder, es decir, tienen tomado la presidencia y no la quieren soltar, la Asamblea Nacional y el presidente debe asumir el poder político y llevar el país a unas condiciones para unas elecciones libres y lograr una transición.
And for this case of like a usurpation of power, the Constitution foresees that the President of the National Assembly takes over and brings the country to new elections.
Y es por eso que el presidente de la Asamblea Nacional de este periodo, Juan Guaidó, un joven de nuestra generación que viene del movimiento estudiantil, le toca asumir este reto tan difícil e importante.
And this is why, since this moment, the President of the National Assembly, Juan Guaidó, who is of our generation of student leaders, actually, came to face, to take up this big challenge to be the interim president.
Entonces, no fue algo que se inventó la oposición, no es una estrategia, ¿no?
So this isn't about a strategy the opposition just made up or came up with.
Es algo, es la norma, es la Constitución que dice, frente a la usurpación del poder, la Asamblea Nacional asume el gobierno de transición y lleva unas elecciones, punto. Ni siquiera era una opción del presidente, era un mandato que tenía que obedecer.
This is something which again, the opposition didn't make up. It's something which is foreseen in the Constitution. In this case of usurpation of power, the President of the National Assembly takes over and does whatever is necessary to organize a new election. So we were following a procedure on legal, constitutional grounds.
Entonces, hoy en día hay un proceso de transición en marcha. Es decir, está Nicolás Maduro con un grupo de militares protegido por unos paramilitares y unas bandas terroristas, y ustedes pueden ver los videos que ellos mismos publican, porque además ellos necesitan mostrarle a la población venezolana que están armados y están dispuestos a matar. Están ahí atrincherados en el poder, protegidos por algunos gobiernos en el mundo, y tenemos
So now we have the situation of Nicolás Maduro, who is there. He's protected by some military and terrorists basically, and has to show the world that he is protected and stays in power.
Y por el otro lado está la Asamblea Nacional legítima, la única institución en el país que fue elegida constitucionalmente y que además hasta ellos mismos reconocieron, y asumiendo el gobierno de transición por mandato constitucional.
And on the other hand, you have the National Assembly, which is the only legitimately elected institution in the country, and everybody would recognize that. And it's their task to bring the country forward to new elections.
Y a toda la población sometida al hambre y a la enfermedad y a la violencia.
And while we are talking, the population is suffering hunger, lacks medicine, and faces violence.
Y es por eso que le estamos pidiendo al mundo no un apoyo a la oposición venezolana, sino un respaldo a la Constitución Nacional venezolana, a la ley, a la norma que dice que debe haber un gobierno de transición y unas elecciones democráticas.
And don't misunderstand us. We would not ask the international community and the outside world to support the political opposition in Venezuela. What we are asking for is only supporting the constitution and the legal grounds.
En Venezuela no hay ningún otro poder democrático, ni el poder electoral, ni el poder judicial, ni el poder moral, que también es un
There
poder.
is no other democratic power in Venezuela, not the judiciary, no even moral democratic power, other than the National Assembly.
Entonces, por otro lado, entre ese para allá y para acá de Estados Unidos, Rusia se adelanta y lleva militares y aviones a Venezuela.
And then there's this dirty game that is going on between the interference from the U.S., the interplay with Russia, who would bring troops into the country. So this is what we're witnessing.
Le estamos pidiendo a la comunidad internacional que hagan lo que es su trabajo, no le estamos pidiendo que se inventen fórmulas nuevas para ayudar a Venezuela.
So what we ask the international community for is just to do their job. They don't have to come up with something new or be imaginative or creative. They just have to live up to their job.
¿Y cuál es su trabajo?
So what do we expect? What is the job what they're supposed to do?
¿Cuál es el trabajo de la comunidad internacional? Pues bueno, está demostrado que hay una violación sistemática, hay un patrón que se repite una y otra vez de violaciones a los derechos humanos, de crímenes de lesa humanidad. Oye, está la norma, está la ley y están los tribunales, los mecanismos. Lo que le estamos pidiendo a la comunidad internacional, que esos instrumentos que ustedes mismos crearon como comunidad internacional sean efectivos. No estamos pidiendo que haga algo nuevo.
Now, there is what we're facing is a systematic violation of human rights. There are crimes against humanity, and all we ask for is the international community to implement, to apply the instruments they themselves have created and put in place.
Y la ruta que se ha planteado desde la Asamblea Nacional y el Gobierno de Transición es cese de la usurpación del poder, gobierno de transición y elecciones libres. Eso es lo que queremos.
And the roadmap the National Assembly has set up is the end of the usurpation of power, the organization of a free and fair election, and this is what we believe in.
Pero ¿qué podemos hacer, Loren? Nosotros no le estamos pidiendo que nos den a sus jóvenes, nos den sus buques, sus aviones y los lleven para Venezuela a combatir por nosotros.
So you might ask me, what do you want us to do for you, Laurent? And I would tell you that we don't want your young people to be sent to us as soldiers. We don't need your military ships or your tanks to free or liberate us.
Lo que estamos diciendo es, oye, estamos tratando de que sea efectiva una investigación en la Corte Penal Internacional por crímenes de lesa humanidad y que hayan sanciones a los criminales, a las personas responsables de crímenes de lesa humanidad. Oye, si eres un general que está asesinando personas o eres un general que está involucrado en narcotráfico, tiene que haber sanciones internacionales.
So all we asking for is a proper inquiry with the International Criminal Court to determine the responsibilities. And if you're a general involved in killings, in assassinations, if you're a general involved in drug trafficking, there must be some responsibility, and we have to end impunity.
Y al mismo tiempo, a pesar de que en este justo y preciso momento están matando gente y están torturando personas, nosotros estamos planteando una reconciliación e incluso fuimos más allá y desde la Asamblea Nacional se planteó una ley de amnistía para todos aquellos militares y funcionarios de seguridad dispuestos a colaborar a una transición pacífica y democrática en Venezuela.
So just to illustrate how far we are ready to go while the assassinations, while this killing is going on, at the same time, we as the opposition were stretched out our hands for reconciliation. We passed this amnesty law to enable amnesty for the military who would surrender, and we are ready to prepare a peaceful transition.
El régimen está debilitado. Pero una cosa es estar debilitado y otra cosa es estar vulnerable. Y si efectivamente queremos que haya negociación, tiene que haber una presión efectiva de parte de la comunidad internacional.
So when we look at the regime, it's definitely weakened. But if it's weakened, it doesn't mean automatically that it's vulnerable. So what we really need is increased pressure by the international community.
Entonces, dos bandas. Por un lado, presionamos a través de la Corte Penal Internacional por los crímenes de lesa humanidad y las sanciones internacionales, y por el otro lado planteamos una ruta de amnistía para los militares. Estamos dispuestos a perdonar muchas de las cosas que han sucedido con tal de lograr una transición pacífica.
So two tracks basically. One is the ICC and the road to legal sanctions against Venezuela, and at the same time we're preparing a roadmap for amnesty, and we're holding out our hands to enable a peaceful transition.
Ahora bien, la inacción, la neutralidad o la no intervención de la comunidad internacional solo está generando dos cosas.
So what are the consequences if the international community doesn't act and just stands idle?
Más muerte y violencia de venezolanos.
So first thing, more deaths and more violence against the Venezuelan people.
Y que Estados Unidos y Rusia se planteen esto como una guerra. Mientras más inacción de la comunidad internacional, más posible y más cerca está un conflicto armado por parte de Rusia y Venezuela en territorio venezolano. Así de claro, y yo sé que todos ustedes saben que es así.
And it's crystal clear for me that the more the international community stands idle, the more we run the risk that we are going into a confrontation between the US on the one hand and Russia on the other.
Entonces, ¿qué pueden hacer? Oye, que los gobiernos, así como lo hizo el Grupo de Lima, por ejemplo, aquí en Europa, que ayuden, que respalden la investigación en la Corte Penal Internacional. ¿Cómo es posible que entren y salgan de Europa los grandes operadores financieros y logísticos del narcotráfico y el terrorismo en Venezuela? ¿Cómo permiten que eso pase?
So what should you do? What should you do? It's there is the efforts of the Lima Group. You should definitely support what is going on with the ICC. And on the other hand, I'm wondering how can it be that those involved in terror, in violence, in killings, and in drug trafficking come and go to Europe to secure their assets here. This is something I cannot understand.
Entonces, por favor, ayúdennos a que estos mecanismos como la Corte Penal Internacional no solamente no sea algo ahí que está pero que no funciona.
So please help us so that let us not make this ICC mechanism something abstract which is just there but which doesn't produce a concrete result.
Porque si no funcionan esos mecanismos que no se crearon por capricho, sino por necesidad, si esos mecanismos no funcionan, entonces la alternativa va a ser la guerra.
So if this mechanism doesn't work, if this avenue is blocked, the only alternative is what? Is war.
Entonces, muchos países han reconocido a Guaidó como un presidente en transición, porque así lo establece la Constitución.
Many countries actually have recognized Juan Guaidó as an interim president because it is on constitutional grounds that he came to this function.
Pero aún hay muchos países que siguen dándole oxígeno a la dictadura.
But unfortunately, there are still a lot of countries out there who continue their support for the dictatorship.
Entonces, repito, investigación en la Corte Penal Internacional, sanciones individuales, no me refiero a embargo nacional, sino sanciones personales a funcionarios con delitos graves. Y que entre los medicamentos y los alimentos a Venezuela y que se exija a Nicolás Maduro que permita unas elecciones libres y democráticas en nuestro país.
So let me summarize. First of all, the avenue of the ICC, the legal road. Second, sanctions. And when I'm talking about sanctions, I'm not talking about an embargo. I'm talking about targeted sanctions against the individuals who have dirty hands. Third, allow the entry of humanitarian aid, food, and medical supply. And four, we need to go to elections.
Y con esto termino. No preparé láminas con estadísticas e indicadores para que vieran cuántos son los números de hambre, de presos, porque aquí ya no se trata de cuántos presos o muertos van.
So I didn't prepare any statistics, any data on how many people are starving, how many people are imprisoned, because what we are talking about is not about figures.
Y cierro con una pregunta que les dejo a mis compañeros aquí. La pregunta hoy que nos hacemos es, y por favor díganosla, ¿cuántos muertos nos faltan? Esa es la pregunta.
The question we are missing, we are just not asking these days is a simple one. How many deaths do we need? How many people still have to die?
¿Cuántos nos faltan? ¿Cuántos más tienen que morir? Díganoslos de una vez.
Just tell me,
claro.
how many more have still to die until we come to an end?
¿Qué? ¿Cuántos miles? ¿Faltan más?
Thousands? Hundreds?
¿Cuántos niños tienen que morir en los hospitales?
How many
Díganoslo.
children have to die in a hospital until we wake up?
Gracias.
Thank you.
Laurent, thank you so much for this very lucid and very challenging presentation, which, just like your presentation earlier in the afternoon, conveyed a very, very clear message, which is that inaction is not an option. I would like to invite Ambassador Marinaki. Would you like to react to the presentation and present a few considerations on the role of the European Union, maybe?
Thank you very much. And indeed, all of us listened extremely carefully to Laurent in the sense that he has the best possible assessment of the situation. And of course, he knows best what should be done for his country. In the name of the European Union, on behalf rather of the European Union, what I would like to reiterate is our solemn commitment to stand by Venezuela for their democratic transition. Federica Mogherini, the High Representative of the European Union's External Action and Vice President of the Commission, is also chairing the International Contact Group, and they met 5 days ago on the 28th of March in Quito. We are all very well aware that today, as we speak, there should be a very large march in Caracas taking place, and definitely there should be another strong message of the people of Venezuela in a very peaceful but massive way of expressing concern and, of course, their wish for a change. The International Contact Group has expressed their grave concern on all the elements of this huge crisis taking place in Venezuela, among which, of course, a leading issue is the humanitarian crisis, and this is one of the major priorities, because the people of Venezuela of all ages have been suffering in this context, and we need to engage. The European Union has come forward with an additional contribution of 50 million euros in this respect, but definitely more needs to be done, and essentially, given the magnitude and the gravity of all the trespasses on human rights, this is an area where the international community should focus so that the transition should be peaceful to the extent possible, and of course the International Contact Group has also condemned the recent decision by the Comptroller General of Venezuela to disqualify Juan Guaido from holding public office for 15 years and all other similar decisions that are absolutely unacceptable. And the parliamentary immunity of all the members of the National Assembly need to be respected at all times. We consider as a positive step in the right direction the coordination team led by the United Nations, which has been put in place, but what needs to be done in order to restore Venezuela back to full democracy and constitutional order in a peaceful manner has to do with first the respect of the mandate of a democratically elected National Assembly and, of course, fully free elections to be held. Furthermore, there cannot be any prisoners, political prisoners, journalists, prisoners of conscience to stay in prison. Everybody should be freed in order to be able to express their own free will. And, of course, the International Contact Group and the European Union on its own, we stand ready to assist all these efforts. We consider that it is important, and I fully agree with Laurent, on the issue of accountability of all perpetrators to be brought to justice, to face a fair trial, and to get a punishment for their deeds. If we want justice to prevail, then this is the prerequisite, and this is what the European Union has been advocating all along, and this is why we're also so supportive of the mandate of the International Court of Justice, and of course of the Rome Statute in the context of the competencies that are promoted in this respect. We feel that the crisis in Venezuela was not created in one day, and therefore it would not be realistic to expect solutions overnight, especially from the outside, to be imposed one way or another, even with the best of intentions. But our role is supportive, complementary, encouraging, and we feel also that at the end of the day, this is one more expression of what Lord Acton said back in 1887 that is absolutely relevant still today, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And this reflects the situation currently in Venezuela. We hope that it will not stay for long, and we are ready to assist because this is what the people of Venezuela deserve, and peace is the name of the game. We wouldn't go along any other solution that would go outside this basic and principal remit. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for a very clear and detailed, I must say, presentation with very concrete both standpoints and policy commitments. Maybe Michel Forst, would you like to react as well?
Thank you. Yes, and you will understand that my mandate is very much focused on defenders. That's why my approach will be quite different from what we from Laurent. And I would like to start by thanking Laurent for the quality of the testimony. What we heard today is what we hear every day from other sources. Defenders traveling to Geneva, to New York, to meet with the UN and to explain the impact of such a political crisis on the population, but also on the defenders. And what is for me impressive is to see the drain of defenders. More and more humanist defenders are leaving the country. They are relocated because of the gravity of the attacks that they are facing in the country. More and more of them decide also to leave the country because they think that it's better for them to operate abroad than to stay in the country. And currently, the situation in Venezuela is for me a matter of concern, like other countries, like Burundi, for instance, which is also a country in which we don't have no more defenders in the country. They are all in prison or relocate elsewhere. Egypt is also, for me, one of those countries in which such a political crisis brings also a drain in the presence of defenders in the country. Since I've started with the mandate on defenders, I did receive a lot of communications coming from organizations from different parts of the country, not only from Caracas, but also from those who are living in remote areas and probably less targeted because they are less protected by the international community. And together with other mandate holders, we have sent scores of communications to the government of Venezuela without, in fact, receiving proper replies from them. We heard of case of criminalization of defenders, that is the use of the law against defenders to target them, arbitrary arrest, campaigns of defamation and vilification of defenders, and also what is for me a matter of concern is reprisals. Those who are currently leaving the country, trying to speak to the UN, when they return to the country, are facing reprisals and attacks by the authorities. Not to mention the use of excessive use of force and things like. What we see is that we do receive more and more testimonies, not only from defenders working on civil and political rights, but more and more from those who are working on economic, social, and cultural rights because of the humanitarian crisis that we face in the country. And my last public statement on Venezuela was not a statement on civil and political rights, but simply on the deaths of 16 children in one of the maternities of the country, just to show the impact of the crisis on the population, and also because the families of the victims of those 16 children were also facing threats and reprisals, trying to complain to the international community. We are also trying to do more and more involving the Inter-American Commission and the Inter-American Court on Human Rights to work with us, with the UN, on the situation in Venezuela, and especially the new special rapporteur on economic, social, and cultural rights from the Inter-American Commission, who is also doing a great job to draw the attention of the Inter-American Commission on the situation in Venezuela. What we see is that also we try to speak to all UN organs, of course the UN at the level of the Department of Political Affairs, to draw the attention not only on the crisis but also on the impact of the crisis to human rights defenders in the country. Of course, OCHA, the Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, is also very much involved in the follow-up to the situation in the country. Currently, you have a team of the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights in Venezuela trying to discuss with the authorities on how the UN, at the level of the OHCHR, could do better supporting defenders in the country. As you know, the polarization of the situation that Laurent mentioned has also a great impact on what's happening at the level of the Human Rights Council in Geneva. At the last session of the Council in March, you had in fact two resolutions competing, one presented by the US supporting Juan Guaido, and the other one presented by Moscow and a group of supporters supporting Maduro, which as a result brought the fact that none of the two resolutions were adopted, and then a small resolution presented by Venezuela was then adopted as a symbolic action by the Council. But for me, there is nothing in this resolution. It's only a call for more action and sort of condemnation of the coercive measures taken by states that also have an impact on the situation of defenders. Laurent also mentioned the fact that this polarization in the country has also an impact on the situation of the neighboring countries. And you may remember that Colombia, in which currently you have more than 1.5 million people from Venezuela relocated in the country. And Colombia tried also to provide support to Venezuela, providing food and medicine and other material, and the trucks were blocked at the border. So you see that it has also an impact, this polarization, on how the international community could better support the population, but also the defenders in the country.
Thank you so much. Again, many very valuable comments and additional perspectives on the topic. Manfred Novak, would you like to add your thoughts as well?
Thank you. I'm still very under the impression of what we heard before in your statement, and while you were speaking, a lot went through my head, bringing me back to my time as Special Rapporteur on Torture, where I had interviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of victims, but also perpetrators of torture. And the way how you described the difference between psychological torture and physical torture, and that in fact, psychological torture leaves more traces on your, not on your body, but on your soul, reminded me of, and that's kind of absurd, I would almost say, since the United States was always the strongest enemy of Chavez and Maduro, and trying already from the very beginning also to destabilize. But the methods that you described in La Tumba, this kind of 5 floors below the earth place as being very clean, being in isolation. That's exactly what I found in Guantanamo Bay, in the prisons, the prison of darkness and other black sites of the CIA, where people were usually not physically tortured, but in the very same way, being put in isolation, sensory deprivation. You also talked about cold and hot, so that you only had the choice between freezing and the heat. It's exactly the same what people told me in Guantanamo Bay. Also that what very much impressed me also when you said you couldn't stand anymore hearing that others were tortured, physically tortured, the screaming of a grown-up man under the physical torture, and that you then tried to intervene, and that then you saw this officer coming, sweating and with blood on his hands, and all of a sudden behaving like a civilized person towards you. What do you want? Why do you yell? And realizing that perpetrators of torture are also human beings. And that reminds me of course, Hannah Arendt and the whole banality of evil that torture is. It's an everyday practice in so many countries in the world. And it's not the individual responsibility of the torturers, it is the responsibility of the system, a system that allows torture, and that is usually dictatorships and countries that are not democratic. And also the way how you describe deprivation of liberty, what it means not to see the sun for 4 years, not to see life, being isolated, again, is something we should think about in times when also in Europe, many people advocate that we should deprive migrants and refugees of liberty, that we should much easier introducing preventive forms of detention simply because people might be dangerous. And the final thing that you said, you attempted twice to commit suicide, and you were cutting yourself simply to draw attention. That's something you find in so many countries in the world, where people simply cutting themselves. Once in Uruguay, Las Latas, one of the worst prisons I've ever seen, when the blood was running down simply because people had no attention. They only wanted some health professionals coming to help them, but nobody actually took care of them. Finally, coming to the real topic now, I fully agree with what you said, what would need to be done, and you are right, the international community developed exactly the mechanisms that we would need to end this form of violence, crimes against humanity, structural violence in a country like Venezuela. That is, on the one hand, the International Criminal Court to bring the perpetrators to justice, and it's the second, the responsibility to protect. Venezuela is a classical country now where the level of crimes committed against the own population has reached the level of crimes against humanity. And what does R2P say? That the international community has a responsibility, not just a right, a responsibility to take action. If governments are either not able or not willing to protect their own people against these crimes, then the sovereignty, the sovereign responsibility moves from the state gradually to the international community. So in reality, it would mean that the Security Council of the United Nations would have the responsibility to take action, not military action, but take action such as mediation, economic sanctions, smart, targeted sanctions, and that would be a possibility to end the violence in Venezuela. But we are unfortunately not living anymore in the world that created these instruments. We are living in a totally different world. Multilateralism is really in a crisis. The Security Council is totally paralyzed, and we have seen that in Syria. We see it every day in Syria. We see it in Yemen. We see it in many countries, and we see it in Venezuela. And if I look at the countries that are supporting Maduro, it's not only Cuba, of course, and China, but it's also Russia, Turkey, and Iran. And that reminds me, unfortunately, of the alliance that is supporting the Assad regime in Syria. It's exactly the same situation. And on the other hand, we have the United States, we have many Latin American countries like Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Brazil, but we also have European countries like Germany, France, Canada. I hope, Mara, that you are, in your optimism, right, that also the European Union can play a very important role in the international contact group. But it's not the United Nations that is able to do anything. Yesterday, again, the United States increased their sanctions by having sanctions against oil vessels that are shipping oil from Venezuela to Cuba. But these are not the sanctions that we would need from the United Nations unanimously. It's simply US sanctions. And I'm afraid that the reaction would be that the Russians are increasing their pressure. And we are going into a direction where we have again an escalation of violence where the international community is not acting to prevent the situation, but in fact having their bilateral political, military, and also to some extent economic interests, because Venezuela is the country with the highest oil reserves in the world. And that plays a role as it does in Syria and in Iraq and in many other countries. So I hope that the current efforts of the International Contact Group will be successful, but I'm highly alarmed by the escalation of bilateral action, on the one hand by the United States and its allies, but on the other hand by the Russian Federation and its allies. Thank you.
Thank you, Manfred. I know that, Mara, you have a very quick reply to the question of the Security Council. And Laurent, I would like to ask if you would like to take just 2 minutes to respond very briefly, because then I would like to open to the floor to ask for comments and questions from the floor, because we have a room full of human rights defenders here, and they also need to be heard in the discussion.
But thank you. Very, very quickly to indicate the obvious, of course, from the side of the International Contact Group, the full rejection of the rule of force. In any case, in the context of the Security Council, which is currently chaired by Germany, I understand that there is quite an advanced stage of discussions to have a special session on the responsibility to protect concept. And I feel that exactly it should be as timely as ever to hold this kind of discussion at this juncture, and from the side of the member states participating currently in the Security Council, all of them are fully behind this. That is, besides the United Kingdom and France, it is Germany, and it is also Poland and Belgium. So full support and responsibility to protect is indeed the name of the game right now, as things have developed in such a wrong way.
Como activista en derechos humanos, no puedo pensar como venezolano, porque el venezolano común, normal,
Talking
quiere,
about the average Venezuelan citizen now,
que está sometido a ese nivel de violencia tan fuerte,
the one who is suffering this high level of violence,
quieren es que los helicópteros lleguen a Miraflores y bajen los marines, agarren a Maduro.
and all they wish to see is to the Marines to jump in, to come down with the helicopters and to take Maduro out.
Los venezolanos están extremadamente desesperados.
People are just completely desperate.
Es como el niño pequeño del colegio que está siempre sometido a grandulones y el niño quiere que llegue otro más grande y ponga en su lugar a esos grandulones.
It's like the little schoolboy who always suffers another one beating him up, and all he wishes to have is a big friend who comes and frees him, takes him out of the situation.
Pero nosotros sabemos que no es así de sencillo y que se puede escalar un nivel de violencia aún mayor del que hay en un país donde no hay ni siquiera un servicio sanitario.
But we know that all this could lead to is even to an even greater escalation, and we're talking about in a country where there is not even a properly functioning health service.
Ahora bien, mientras que se ponen de acuerdo en el Consejo de Seguridad, mientras se define cómo se come eso de la responsabilidad para salvar vidas,
So while they are talking up there in the Security Council, while they are talking, discussing about the concept of the responsibility to protect,
los rusos llenan Venezuela de militares y aviones.
the Russians have transferred soldiers and airplanes, military airplanes, to Venezuela.
Los grupos guerrilleros y paramilitares en la frontera reclutan menores de edad
Guerrillas and paramilitary groups close to the border are recruiting.
y hay una presión de sectores en América hacia Estados Unidos para que se meta también y hagan algo.
And there is a pressure out there asking also from the United States to get involved.
Entonces, el Consejo de Seguridad debe actuar pronto.
So the Security Council has to act.
Y yo apuesto a sanciones más fuertes. Y hay algo que es importante aclarar, porque hay una manipulación siempre. Bueno, pero las sanciones afectan al pueblo, a la people.
So I of course I want stronger sanctions, and when people are talking about it, they always say, well, the sanctions they basically affect the population.
Pero esto no es así. ¿Por qué? La señora que está en un hospital, que su hijo se le está muriendo porque no tiene medicamento, ¿en qué le afecta que el general fulano?
So let's look at the woman who is in the hospital with in her arms her baby child who is dying because there's no medication. What is the relationship with the general?
Que la Unión Europea le diga, mire general, usted no puede entrar más a territorio europeo y estos 200, 300 millones que tienen en cuentas aquí están congelados.
So how powerful could it be if the European Union told this military, this general, listen, the money you want to bring into the European, you can't do it anymore, and the money you have already in the European Union, we're going to freeze it.
Yo creo en las sanciones, creo en mecanismos diplomáticos para obligar a la dictadura a ceder y dar paso a una transición democrática.
I believe in sanctions. I believe in a democratic way. I believe in targeted sanctions against individuals, and this will eventually lead the dictatorship to give in and to enter into a transition.
Ahora, es grave esto. Hoy se para Marcos Rubio o cualquier senador y dice, o pone una foto de un uniforme naranja y le escribe amenazando a Diosdado y genera unas expectativas gigantes y no pasa nada.
No, these days you can create a buzz with public opinion, but there's basically very often no consequences of that.
Entonces, ¿y qué pasa? El régimen sí actúa en consecuencias. Entonces, el problema es que se está generando expectativas por parte de Estados Unidos y de otros gobiernos que se terminan en fantasía y no actúan, solo amenazan, pero los rusos sí están actuando, los iraníes sí están actuando y los grupos guerrilleros en la frontera están actuando.
So what you're doing basically is raising expectations for the U.S. to act, possibly to intervene or whatsoever, while on the ground Russia is pouring in militaries and the paramilitary is shaping up and they create effects on the ground, so there is a gap.
Thanks again for your comments and views. I think we should, I would like to open up to our participants in the Venice School. Would you like to make comments or questions to Laurent or to the panel? I see several hands, so please.
Yeah, I already got the microphone. Thanks. I'm the quickest one. My name is Yaropolka. I'm from Ukraine, and my question is related to the ICC, to the International Criminal Court. As you know, we are having a 5 years ongoing conflict, and a lot of cases are documented. A lot of cases, like 1,000 cases of tortures are, for example, are documented and submitted to the ICC, and we are still on the preliminary examination case. And this case, Ukrainian case, is not new for the ICC, and a lot of human rights defenders all around the world are telling that, oh, this bureaucratic machine, the whole nature of the International Criminal Court makes it impossible actually to punish higher commandment responsible for the war crimes or crimes against humanity. And we actually see that people who are responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in eastern Ukraine, for example, they are dying or they are killed by themselves being free, not getting like punishment for their for what they did to civilians, to civilian population, to combatients, to prisoners of war. So my question is there a discussion among like experts as you are on how could international society change the behavior of this like important body of international criminal justice, but still ineffective body? It seems it looks like ineffective body. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Yvonne. I'm from Kenya. My question is to Laurent. You are strong. You're a leader. You're a leader now. You're a leader in many years to come. But right now, with the crisis happening in Venezuela, I'm curious to find out. I believe there are human rights activists who are suffering right now. Are you in touch with them? And as you've mentioned earlier, human rights is actually, working for human rights is an organic process. It takes years. Do you have a plan to work with young Venezuelans? Because young people like you who are fighting human rights are not there as much as they should be. And you're a great inspiration. Thank you.
Well, think Your next questions and comments, I'll immediately give the word now to Lauren and to any other panelists who would like to jump in.
Sí, bueno, estamos en permanente comunicación.
So of course we are in constant communication with people in Venezuela, with human rights activists.
La tecnología nos permite, pues, poder estar bien comunicados.
Thanks to nowadays technology, we are lucky to be connected.
Pero bueno, ahora el gobierno hace cortes largos de luz que esos apagones tienen que ver con el colapso, pero también con la instrumentalización de la energía para dejar a la gente incomunicada por mucho tiempo.
Even if these days the electricity network collapses frequently, and this has to do with how rotten the system is on one hand, on the other hand, how the government plays with this factor.
Pero estamos conectados a través de una red. Es que más allá de lo político e ideológico, también ha sido una lucha generacional.
And we are connected, we are a network, and you have to picture that more than a political or ideological confrontation, we are talking about a generational conflict.
Ahora bien, para quienes tenemos posiciones de liderazgo, la situación es muy complicada.
For us as leaders, the situation is very complicated.
Porque, claro, hay mucho desespero en Venezuela y cuando uno no plantea acciones inmediatas y tratas de mantenerte como un defensor de derechos humanos, la gente, al no ver respuesta, te acusa de traidor, de negociador.
So expectations are so high in Venezuela that when you're in a leadership position, where you're a human rights defender, they expect action, and they would expect it immediately. And if you can't deliver, they might end up calling you a traitor.
Entonces, el problema es que mi celda no quedó vacía. Mi celda hoy está ocupada por otro joven, y todos los liderazgos que salen a nivel estudiantil o juvenil, pues terminan en la cárcel y en el mejor de los casos en el exilio.
So what happens actually, my former prison cell isn't vacant. There is another young student in it, and whatever new young leaders from the young generation come up, they end up in the same place. So this is not easy.
Y a mí lo que me preocupa ahorita, y es como tratar de contener el agua, es que en medio de este drama no tomen las armas para defenderse.
So my major concern in this situation actually is how to avoid that in this desperation, in this despair, people end up taking arms to fight for their liberty.
Entonces, digamos que uno de los grandes retos hoy es tratar de mantener a los jóvenes en una actitud de resistencia no violenta, a la par que los están asesinando con tiros a quemarropa.
For me, one of the major challenges of our times is to maintain youth out there with a peaceful approach to resistance, whereas on the other hand, you have a state applying violence and it's full power without any restriction.
Pero yo no sé cuánto podamos contener eso.
I really don't know how long we still would succeed in calming them down.
Fíjense, 20 años lleva la dictadura en Venezuela.
So we have 20 years of dictatorship in Venezuela.
Con un nivel de violencia exacerbado.
Where we witnessed an absolutely exaggerated level of violence.
Y todavía, a pesar de todo eso, no ha habido un movimiento armado que responda a la dictadura. Oye, ¿qué más democrático puede ser el pueblo venezolano? O sea, ¿qué más nos piden? El venezolano sigue marchando por la calle a pesar de que sabe que va a llegar a una contención donde ¡pum, pum!, lo van a matar.
And even with this 20 years of constant violence, can you imagine that the Venezuelans are still there on the streets and they are keeping on walking peacefully, even if they know that at the end of the day they can be assassinated?
Entonces, si yo no fuera activista en derechos humanos y no me mantuviera en un ejercicio permanente de meditación y de análisis, seguramente estuviera viendo cómo consigo un arma para defender a mis hermanos.
So if I wasn't a human rights defender, and if I was not trying to adopt all the time this position of stepping back and analyzing and rationalizing, putting into perspective, I think I would take an arm.
Entonces es dramático y yo les pido también que ustedes nos digan, porque no hemos conseguido un manual en internet que nos digan cómo actuar.
So please tell us what should we do, because I cannot download a manual which would tell me what to do in such a situation.
Thanks again. Would any of the other panelists like to comment on the ICC question that I think was also very pertinent?
Hesitantly, I do, because I always was a strong fan of the International Criminal Court. I was very much campaigning in the 90s for establishing a permanent International Criminal Court, and I think it's a big success of the international community to finally agree after Nuremberg. So it took that long. In the Cold War, it was impossible. And with the ICTY and the ICTR, the ice was broken. And finally, we got it in Rome in 1998. And Latin America, together with Europe, the European Union was the strongest supporter, and the GULAG, the Latin American group. Why? Because of the military dictatorships in Latin America, the Nunca Más, the fight against impunidad. That was the reason for the Latin American states to support the ICC, and most of the Latin American states have ratified the Rome Statute, but not Venezuela, to my knowledge. That would mean we are again in a situation similar to Syria, similar to Libya, that we need the Security Council. And that is a possibility. Again, if there would be a responsibility of the Security Council, I think already a long time ago, they should have referred the situation in Syria to the ICC and also the situation in Venezuela. But without that, the ICC has no competence. But it was done in Libya, it was done in Sudan, etc. In the Ukraine, it's different. The ICC is competent, and that's why I said I'm hesitant, because I feel more and more that the ICC is really not functioning as it should. It's highly bureaucratized, it's far too long, it is upholding the highest standards of an adversarial American type of criminal justice. What judges of the ICC explained to me once, it's a ping-pong game. So it's the ping-pong between the prosecution and the defense, and we are just sitting and as continental European judges, and we cannot interfere. And that was made for a criminal justice with a jury of lay judges. That might make sense, but not when you have highly qualified professional judges in the ICC who have to wait very, very long, and then if the defense is asking another 20 witnesses, then it takes another year in order until all these witnesses will be heard. So it is very, very slow, and in my opinion, really ineffective. So in my opinion, the statute, or at least the rules of procedure, would need really to be changed. But again, in a time when there is so little support for international criminal justice from the main powers, it is very difficult to change that. But I fully agree. And then, of course, you need the support in order, if you have an arrest warrant, finally, also to arrest the people. And those people you're talking about, they are living in the eastern part of the Ukraine, and it will be very, very difficult for Ukrainian authorities to actually arrest them. But that's the next step. They should actually be surrendered. It's an international obligation that all states have to surrender them to the ICC as soon as there's an arrest warrant.
Fíjese, yo,
Yes, okay.
el caso de Ucrania,
When we take the case of Ukraine,
Cuba,
Cuba,
Nicaragua, Irán, Arabia Saudita, la misma Colombia todavía. Oye, si bajamos y revisamos lo que está pasando, le cambias el nombre y el idioma y es igual.
when you look down to it, to all these countries, just change the name and the language and you will find all the similarities.
Hay una falla en el sistema, hay una falla y esa falla se paga con vidas humanas.
There is a bug in the system, and the price for this are human lives.
Y estas estructuras creadas para evitar la justicia por las propias manos, si no funcionan, oye, la violencia sigue escalando, sigue escalando.
When these very structures that were put in place to make justice happen don't function, then this will just fuel more violence.
Y el problema es que parece que los organismos internacionales, en muchos casos, actúan como un club de presidentes que se terminan al final protegiéndose entre sí. ¿No?
I have sometimes the impression that these international organizations they acting like a club with the members, and they are ending up protecting themselves.
Y tenemos un papel que nos dice que tenemos derecho a vivir, a comer, a expresarnos, pero está allí en papel.
Yeah, when we look at what is written on paper we have all these rights. There is the right to life, there is a right to food, and on paper everything is there.
Y ahí creo que hay que hacer el esfuerzo para que estos organismos sean efectivos, porque la Corte Penal realmente no está haciendo nada.
So I firmly believe that we have to make an additional effort to make these mechanisms work, because this is at the end all we have.
Time is running out, but we still have time for one or two more questions from the floor.
Well, hi, Bulat Mohamedjanov from Russia. I have two questions. The second one, are there any international human rights organizations working in Venezuela? Does the government allow them to work also as the local human rights activists? And the second question is more political, let's say. In your opinion, how will the events develop in your country? I don't know, in a year, for example. And do you suppose, or do you expect civil war? If yes, what can cause the war? I mean, internal forces, or I don't know, external impact. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Humaydi. I'm from Kuwait. I have a question about the rise of the far-right wings in Europe. What do you see the future of this rise with the relationship inside in the EU and outside the EU?
Maybe I'll just add one observation or a comment also linked with the last question. I have to say, as program director of one of the 7 global campus programs on human rights and democracy, I'm really impressed by our discussions both earlier today and now in the late afternoon about how they demonstrate the close interconnections between fighting for human rights and fighting for democracy. In fact, in our discussions today, it's one and the same. It's entirely one and the same issue, the fight for democracy and the fight for human rights. And I think that what we're witnessing is, in fact, great setbacks in both areas, and it's really a pressing question. I think the issue of the rise of the far right is part and parcel of this observation as well. But anyway, Laurent, and then any other panelist with short responses and maybe final comments.
Fíjense, en el 2008 hice la primera huelga de hambre junto a compañeros para llamar la atención de la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos y el Alto Comisionado de Derechos Humanos. En el 2008.
So in 2008, I went on a hunger strike to attract the attention of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights.
Hoy, 2019, todavía no ha podido entrar la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos.
And we are in 2019, and up to now, this commission could not enter Venezuela.
Porque para poder entrar, la Cancillería le tiene que autorizar, y obviamente un régimen que viola y comete crímenes de lesa humanidad jamás va a autorizar a la Comisión Interamericana a que entre a ver si es verdad que lo están haciendo.
So for the Inter-American Commission to enter the country, they would need authorization from the Foreign Ministry, and the Foreign Ministry that is perpetrating crimes against humanity would never admit a commission to come in to witness these crimes.
Y en el caso de la ONU, desde el 2008, desde el 2007 en realidad, que nace el movimiento estudiantil. Ojo, hablo de mi generación, pero hay defensores y activistas que están desde antes del 2007 pidiendo atención en la ONU. Y solo hasta el año pasado, en diciembre, después de varias huelgas de hambre, persecuciones, un montón de jóvenes asesinados, 4 años de prisión, etcétera, 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 es que me pudieron recibir en el Alto Comisionado de Derechos Humanos y pude conversar en esta oportunidad con Michelle Bachelet.
So since 2007, myself and other students, the young generation, were trying to attract the attention of the UN on the case of Venezuela. And then we witnessed what we have been witnessing: assassinations, killings, violence, etc., without success. So my generation at that time already raised the issue, and it took me until last year to be able to speak with the High Commissioner and raise these questions finally at UN level.
Entonces, tenemos organizaciones de derechos humanos independientes que están haciendo un trabajo absolutamente temerario, porque todos los defensores de derechos humanos en Venezuela están desprotegidos, y creo que esto se repite en muchos países, o en casi todos los países donde hay graves situaciones de derechos humanos. Entonces, o sea, nos dicen que tenemos derecho y tenemos herramientas, pero cuando vamos a ellas no pasa nada.
So we are the human rights defenders in Venezuela. They do admirable work on a day-by-day basis, and there are protections mechanisms out there. On paper, everything is set up. When we try to access them, it simply doesn't work.
Thank you. So, Mara, would you like to make a short observation?
Indeed, happy to. First, to confirm, I just checked that indeed there has been a formal request by the United States for the Security Council to convene on the 10th of April on humanitarian grounds for Venezuela. And the answer from Germany as the chair is expected. Most probably this will be upheld, so it will be for next Wednesday for this meeting of the Security Council to take place. Also, to comment very briefly on what Georg indicated on the direct relevance of human rights and democracy. It doesn't go any other way. The human rights are the flip side of democracy. You cannot have the one without the other, because essentially democracy is translated for each one of us at a personal human level through the human rights. This is what democracy means to each one of us as a human being. Thanks.
Michelle Force.
Yeah, maybe very briefly to say that I would confirm what Laurent said on the difficulty for the UN to have access to the country. Since I've been appointed, I've tried at many occasions to be invited by the government of Venezuela to undertake an official mission, and they always denied me the access to the country. That's why in 2015 I asked a group of defenders led by Feliciano Reyes to invite me to give a lecture at the Catholic University of Caracas, and at that occasion had the possibility to meet with the government and to discuss with them, and then to raise the voice of the defenders before the council. But since then, it has been impossible for me to return back to the country.
2 points. One, but I also would like to stress that the Permanent Council of the Organization of American States has already in, I think it was in January of this year, clearly also supported Juan Guaido as the legitimate representative of Venezuela. And in principle, it would be very, very good if the OAS, as the competent regional organization, would take the lead in order to keep world politics, bilateral world politics out. But let's see to what extent that might help. Second, I fully agree also that human rights and democracy, and that is seen very, very strongly in Venezuela, are simply twins. If you undermine democracy, you also undermine human rights. And that is also why I'm extremely concerned about the rise of the far right in Europe, in all over Europe, because of the migration and refugee crisis of the European Union. The European Union not being able actually to develop a common asylum and migration policy as is already envisaged since the Amsterdam Treaty, because the individual states are not willing and have not been willing to do it. The Commission, the Parliament had many, many initiatives, but they all were not working, and the right-wing parties, in fact, are only, it's a one issue with which they are gaining significance, and that is really undermining. It's the level of hatred that you see in the current political discourse has never been that strong. Again, I would say since the end of World War II, then we feel it today, and that is undermining the democratic discourse. Democracy always means to speak to each other, to respect each other, to find compromises. And we see a level of deterioration of democratic values in the United States as much as we see them in many countries in Europe. Again, there's a certain fear that in the upcoming elections to the European Parliament, that the various right-wing groups, 3 altogether, might even get more votes than the traditional parties. But on the other hand, again, you feel a certain movement. Again, enough is enough. So there's a certain standing up of the pro-European forces, and let's see. But I think the upcoming European elections will be really a litmus test to what extent the European Union will be able to counter this threat from the far right.
Thank you, Manfred. It's 7:05. Our allotted time has come to a close, and I'd like to sort of conclude with a few words of thanks. First of all, to you, Laurent, for sharing your knowledge and more importantly, your passion and commitments with us. I think it's been hugely inspirational for all of us to to meet you and hear you speak. I'd like to thank all panelists who have joined us in a very, I think, interesting and rich discussion. I would like to once again thank our friends in the Italian criminal law associations, both nationally and in Venice, very much for your support. Very importantly, we should thank the European Parliament for its support, not only for our work in general, but also for this event in particular, and for linking us with the Sakharov Prize and the Sakharov Fellowship Initiative, because it's really inspirational and enriching for us. And in this connection, I would like to really comment you, Stefan Kraus, on your skills as an interpreter, because